David Lewis, a philosopher, proposed modal realism, a view that considers all possible worlds as real, just like the actual world. Modal realism consists of four principles. Firstly, possible worlds exist. Secondly, possible worlds are not different in nature from the actual world. Thirdly, possible worlds are irreducible entities. And fourthly, the term actual used for the actual world is indexical. Extending modal realism is the concept of ontological commitments to impossible worlds and places objects in the modal dimension, in contrast to Lewis' modal realism where an object inhabits only one possible world. Modal realism has both proponents and opponents. Supporters argue that it is useful for modal reasoning in natural language. On the other hand, opponents assert that it results in an abundance of ontological commitments that are not necessary and that it is counterintuitive to consider possible objects equal to actual ones. The term modal realism dates back to Leibniz's possible worlds theory, which distinguished between necessary and possible propositions based on their truth in all or at least one possible world. 6 doctrines form the foundation of Lewis's modal realism, including the existence of possible worlds, their irreducibility, and spatio-temporal isolation. Although Lewis expressed regret for the term's choice, he insisted that his claims should be taken literally. The theme of the story revolves around the concept of possible worlds and the challenges associated with understanding their nature. The author explores the various dimensions of possible worlds, such as their quantity, variations, commonalities, and laws of identity. However, unlike someone who pretends to believe in possible worlds, but in reality doesn't, the author's belief in their existence puts him at a disadvantage as he acknowledges the limitations of his knowledge regarding their true nature. The article also discusses extended modal realism, which differs from other modal realist views in its conception of possible worlds as points or indices of the modal dimension. Regular objects are extended not only in spatial and temporal dimensions but in the modal dimension as well. The author further elaborates on the concept of modal parts by exploring possible versions of oneself that took different life choices and how they inhabit different possible worlds that are also a part of oneself. Yakusawa's views on modal realism encompass impossible worlds, which are just as real as possible or actual entities. The author provides an analogy of abstract mathematical constructs such as sets that were initially philosophically unintuitive but proved useful in understanding mathematical concepts. Similarly, possible worlds have helped make sense of philosophical concepts in various fields, including epistemology, metaphysics, and philosophy of mind, making their existence acceptable on pragmatic grounds. Lewis argues that to make sense of modality, we must reduce it to the conception of a real world in which the idea holds. The idea of possible worlds as ways how things could have been is often met with suspicion and requires assumptions from natural language. The argument from Ways relies on quantification, which some philosophers, like Quine, believe entails ontological commitments, while others disagree. Critics of possible worlds theory may challenge the theory's compatibility with our intuitions and common sense, which Lewis acknowledges but ultimately finds unpersuasive. He argues that reasonable argument and the efficiency of the theory compel us to accept modal realism and reject alternatives that contradict our modal intuitions. Lewis's theory of possible worlds is a subject of debate among philosophers. Some argue that his principles of world-making lead to an excessive number of possible worlds, which challenges mathematical propriety. However, Daniel Nolan has presented a counterargument against this objection. Others have raised concerns about the concept of island universes and the possibility of their existence. Lewis acknowledges these objections but suggests that other means of distinguishing worlds may be available. Some argue that multiverse theory can do all the modal work, making modal realism unnecessary. Lewis uses two quoque arguments to counter objections and defends his theory's heuristic virtue. However, Robert Stalnaker finds Lewis's theory ultimately untenable and instead advocates for a more moderate realism about possible worlds, which he terms actualism. Overall, Lewis's theory of possible worlds is a complex topic that challenges mathematical principles and epistemological beliefs. Modal realists who believe in the overlap of identities in multiple worlds are not subject to the Humphrey objection, despite Lewis' concerns about this view. he dismisses the alleged intuition that it raises problems with his argument for morality, which critiques modal realism based on its implications for morality. Plenitude principle entails that the nature of the pluriverse is predetermined, suggesting that the choices of human agents have no impact on reality in its entirety. For example, in one possible world, saving a drowning child would result in letting it drown in another. This means that there is no moral obligation to save the child, which conflicts with common-sense morality. David Lewis argues that morality only concerns the actual world and the harm caused by the agent. However, this is problematic as it does not explain why we should prefer the actual world, as modal realism opposes unequal treatment. Fisher concedes that modal unrestricted morality does not prioritize saving the child, but common-sense morality does. Therefore, while there are costs to modal realism, it is not a conclusive argument against it.